cyclic hyperventilation to air pack and then go underwater, but your carbon dioxide is then lower, you're going to be able to stay under longer. But this is very dangerous because normally when that carbon dioxide threshold hits, you would pop up to the surface, you sort of panic and want to go to the top. Free divers learn to tolerate high levels of carbon dioxide in their bloodstream and stay very, very calm. The way they die is very interesting because it speaks to the physiology. The way they die is they'll just be swimming, feeling completely calm because they're very used to, they've trained up this CO2 tolerance, carbon dioxide tolerance. And when they die, they don't suddenly feel like, oh my goodness, I'm running out of air. It's just lights go black. That's it, they're just blackout. And so they're alive and then they're gone. And so this is why they use spotters, they have a line, et cetera. Anytime you hear about somebody dying doing free diving, it's rarely because they weren't comfortable at a given depth or because they've never been to that depth.
Their gasp reflex has kicked in. It's because their gasp reflex has been so desensitized that it's after the point at which they die.
Precisely. And this, it's sort of like when you hear that skilled parachuters die. Why? Well, because they're so comfortable with so many jumps, they actually forget to pull. There are many instances in which they're videoing the first time jumpers, right? And they're getting the video for them and they themselves forget to pull because they're so comfortable jumping out of planes. And so as people get more and more advanced in something, there's a new risk that surfaces because unless it's very reflexive and they built all the protocols in, oftentimes they can overlook the very thing that allowed them to become expert in the first place.
Why do my palms get sweaty when I watch videos of people climbing up cranes and stuff like that? You know the ones that I mean? The guy's got a GoPro. There's a dude called James Kingston from the UK that's a psychopath. He goes up to the highest towers of Dubai illegally in the middle of the night, and then I watch it on a screen that's only this big, and I get this visceral response.
Yeah, well, two things. First of all, I can relate. I saw the Free Solo movie with Alex Honnold, and he lives, and it's still scary to watch, right? You actually know the outcome at the beginning. They sort of make it clear that he manages to do this, and it's still terrifying. And I think it's for the same reason that those YouTube videos are terrifying, which is that we are so visual as animals. We are so visual. I mean, rodents, even a lot of carnivore predators are extremely olfactory, smell-driven. Humans are incredibly visual. I mean, more than 40% of the human brain has something to do with vision. Visual navigation, eye movements, visual perception, color perception, face perception. We have dedicated areas of the brain that are just for perceiving human faces and the micro expressions of human faces. So it's so highly evolved for us. When we see depth of field that's not parallel to the ground, it is terrifying with good reason because, what's the universal force that we all experience from the time we're born is gravity. The first thing you learn is that things fall down, not up, right? It's like the fundamental rule that we come into the world with. It's like day one, even though the baby is kind of flopping around like a potato but can't even hold its head up, eyes are often, the ocular muscles of the eyes are often not very good, so babies, their eyes are rolling back in their head. That generally corrects itself over the next few weeks or so. But the feeling of gravity of them, if they feel like they're being dropped even the tiniest bit, right, they will go wide-eyed. So there's a built-in vestibulo-ocular reflex. So when you see depth of field in the direction of the gravitational pull, you actually get...
If you have a difficulty with another human being, there's some point of ignorance and some point of delusion that are keeping you from being able...
On both sides.
On both sides. The problem is you can only worry about yours. And then once you clear yours and your vision gets clean and purified, and you approach a person from a purified space, things get a whole lot easier.
Hey everyone, welcome back to On Purpose, the #1 health podcast in the world, thanks to each and every single one of you that come back every week to listen, learn, and grow. Now today is a very, very special episode of On Purpose. Not only is it the first episode of season 3, not only am I sitting down with the one and only Will Smith, but today we're gonna dive in to the mind, the heart, and the soul of the man behind the movies and the music, and my dear, dear spiritual brother and friend. So, Will, with that, without any further ado, I just want to say I am grateful, I'm humbled, I'm so happy to have spent so many special moments with you over the past year. This sounds romantic now. My wife's gonna get worried again. but I mean it, man.
She's like, you've been spending a lot of time with Will.
Yeah, she's never felt uncomfortable about my relationship apart from with you. The only time she's doubted me is like, oh, another trip with Will. That's why this time she came along.
We certainly have some pictures, waterfalls, glaciers.
Yeah. We definitely didn't even take all the pictures. But no, thank you, man. This is going to be special, and I'm just excited for us to serve together in this way.
No, this is fantastic. It's been a long time coming for us to sit down like this. For the people listening, it's probably been a year. We're running up on a year now, right?
Yeah.
It's like 10 months or something like that.
Yeah.
That I've been studying with Jay. I fell in love with the Bhagavad Gita. Jay and I have been spending time. We've been hanging. We've been traveling together. Jay has really been the catalyst for this next phase of my life. We have committed to one another in a brotherhood of service and support, and we've been. I guess we've been in the gym. We've been in the soul gym, working out for the past 8 months, and this is our first time, doing anything that's public facing. So I'm excited to talk about what we've been working on, and Jay's been working with my family pretty much every day. A new Smith starts to study with Jay.
Beautiful
and
family.
Also our teacher Radhanath Swami. So it's been a beautiful year. And I'm very excited to start talking to people about what we've been studying and learning and doing together.
Absolutely, man. And I also want to say, too, I think it's rare where you get to sit down with someone that you've got to know intimately and closely. Mm-hmm. And also when you sit down, and I've probably watched, I'm trying to think, I think I've watched every interview you've ever done, over the years. Before I met you, when I met you, I'm always talking to you. I'm like, oh, I remember you said this 5 years ago or 10 years ago you were saying this. And when I'm sitting down with you now, I'm thinking, I remember the first time I properly met you was at Willow's birthday a few years back. And everyone was it was Willoween. Yeah. So everyone was dressed in costumes and stuff. So I didn't even know it was you. And then you had like the Zorro kind of mask over your eyes. And so it was a big person. I was like, oh, maybe that's Will, maybe that's not. I didn't know. And then you lifted your mask off. And the thing I recognized you about from the moment I met you was just your ability. You have this unique ability to just be really present and kind and deeply there with everyone you meet.
Right. Well, thank you, man.
And I think that for, having met you in public arenas, whether it was the Bad Boys premiere and then in our personal meetings, as you were mentioning, you're just even better.
Well, thank you, man.
And I think that that's so hard to be when you're that good. But I remember that, and that was the hospitality Radhi felt with you, like that ability to care for each person walking in, the family aspect, making us feel welcomed and a part of it. That I just think that in today's world, that human aspect is what we're all missing.
I think that is a part of my DNA. Part of it from difficult aspects of my childhood. I grew up with violence in my home, so I developed, a really acute emotional sense, out of defense. I just needed to make sure that my father was okay. I needed to make sure things were going well. And I just became really hypersensitive to emotional movement in a room as a defense mechanism. And then as I, grew and as I started to develop that, that heightened sense that started out as defense, as I settled down and, came into a deeper understanding of my power and my desires in the world, it was easier to connect to people in a loving way. It transferred easily from a defense mechanism to an ability to love and care for people.
That's amazing, though, that you were able to process it positively.
Yeah.
I feel like we're living at a time, we've talked about this before, that our childhood experiences form our adult desires.
Absolutely.
And I feel like now people are starting to hear that in the conversation where they're like, oh yeah, because this happened with my parents.
Yeah.
Now I feel like this. How do you think you were able to, because we've talked about this before when you've talked about your mother, your father, what you learned from them. Tell us a bit about what you learned and how you were able to process it positively and engage with it rather than create a negative story from it. Because a lot of people may see violence and react differently.
Yeah. I think there's always an aspect of us that when we feel unloved, in any capacity, in any relationship, when we feel unloved, when we feel mistreated, when we feel somehow disrespected, it's a natural reaction to want revenge. And I think that's what happens with most people, specifically in our most vulnerable stages when we're children, and we haven't done anything to deserve that kind of treatment. It's really hard for the ego to not click into revenge, and once I discovered that mechanism, once I saw that most of us walk around with, that we want revenge against that mistreatment. It's a little piece of that with all of us. So the problem is that when you seek revenge, you destroy yourself, and that's the paradoxical conflict that we all live in. Yeah. Someone has mistreated us. We want revenge, but if we take it, we hurt ourselves more.
It's crazy how it's
right?
designed.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is the, as Radhanath Swami referred to, the perplexing situation that we find ourselves in. And the only answer is loving kindness. And most of us don't want to hear that. It's like, I'll take my chances with revenge. I'm going to take my chances with punching this dude in the face or cussing this girl out or whatever it takes, but I can't do loving kindness. Yeah. And for me, I had such a beautiful example of loving kindness in my grandmother when I was growing up. I always knew I wanted to be that, the way that she loved and cared for people. I didn't realize that her giving was connected to her peace. That was something that I got a concept of later, but I always knew that was my example, and I think that's the critical part. We need an example. Somebody has to be an example. Human beings are creatures of example. You got to see it.
Yeah.
So that's really where I am in my life right now. I want to show what it looks like to be loving and kind and giving and forgiving, and I want to model those virtues as best I can.
It's amazing how the thing we think that's going to help us feel better is actually what makes us feel worse.
Yep.
And you hold on to it because somewhere inside of you, you feel you have to be the person to show that person the truth. Like you feel like it's your responsibility.
Yes. You're going to be the hammer of justice.
Yeah, and so you carry that. And it reminds me of, there was this thing this lesson that we were talking about and sharing in our meetings was this quote by Russell Barkley where he said, people who need the most love ask for it in the most unloving ways.
Absolutely.
And that's what you were saying when you were giving examples of people in our society today who, it sounds crazy, but somehow they are seeking love.
Absolutely.
And when you kind of put that in your head, you're like, oh, like that's just a plea, a begging.
A begging,
A literal, like, it's not even a proposal, it's like a demand for love.
It's a demand, absolutely.
And you were saying that, and I love what you said then. That's why I'm bringing it back to what I was saying earlier. The reason why I was highlighting the personal aspect of you is that I think that the example that you're setting through who you can be is even more than what you've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What you've done is amazing, and there's nothing to be taken away from it. It's phenomenal what you're achieving and what you continue to achieve. But being able to do that with a loving heart, that must be, I mean, how does that feel internally? Does that also feel that way, or no? Are you like, no, Jay,
no,
the success feels way better than that, Jay. You don't get it.
But you know, we had that conversation, and there was a real period in my life that I had to struggle with. We can win, or I can be nice. Pick one. Right? And different people pick different things.
Right.
For the type of material world climbing, you know, that I did for a big chunk of my life, it was military-minded. You know, we're gonna get that flag to the top of that hill, and you are gonna help or you're not gonna be here, right? So that's one mindset. And then after I got the flag to the hill a couple of times and kept getting the flag to the hill and realized that you don't feel good and you've scorched earth, you know, around you, and you're like, nobody's really happy, you know. And then I started to have to question that mindset. You know, I had one of the greatest runs in Hollywood history, you know, 8 #1 movies, all over 100 domestic, biggest global movie star, all of that, and my family was miserable, you know. And I had equated winning with happiness, right? It's like, we're winning. What is y'all problem? You know? You know? And the transition from product focus, like military-minded, get to the top of that hill, and then I shifted into a mindset, and it was really my kids who brought me out of that. A shift into discovering, like, well, damn, people really care about how they feel, right? You know, as crazy as that sounds, like, you know, my father wasn't concerned with how I felt. You know, he wasn't concerned with how he felt. He was military-minded. You achieved the mission. And there's 2 possibilities. When I give you a mission, there's 2 possibilities. 1, you complete the mission, or 2, you're dead, right? You know, and that's what my father was saying. I grew up with that. Oh, cool, right? I actually had to discover feelings, right? And start, like, I used to have to really focus on, okay, how's this person feel? How's this person feel? Not what do I need them to do, and not they're wasting our time right now and we're losing time and we're gonna not finish this mission, right? But there is a balance between the mindset of achieving and loving kindness that at this point in my life, I've actually discovered the magical balance, but it's really hard to get people to let go of the attack and defend achievement mindset and trust the care and concern for your fellow humans as a way of creating higher production.
Yeah. I hope everyone who's listening and watching right now is taking this in, because I think what you're painting is a very transparent, honest picture of our minds.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I can relate to what you're saying. So I can relate to times in my life where I've been so about winning and success and numbers or whatever it may have been. And I know I'm not even becoming the person I want to be in that process, and I don't even like myself. But because you're choosing to like yourself because of what you're achieving, you're finding a new way to like yourself, but not over who you really are. And so I just hope everyone who's listening and watching, you know, when you speak sometimes, Will, it's so extreme because you've got so close to that emotion that sometimes people can think, oh no, that's a bit extreme, I'm a bit more balanced. But really, we all have that kind of, does that make sense? Like, we all have a bit of that extreme instinct inside of us in some area of our life. And it's sometimes a delusion to feel, oh, I'm actually balanced. Like, we sometimes listen and go, oh yeah, no, that's him.
Oh,
like,
that's him, his father was military.
I'm balanced, you know? And we always feel we're balanced.
Yes, exactly. I felt like I was balanced. I felt like I was balanced.
We always feel like we're on that, as the Buddha would say, as we talked about, the middle path. Like, we always feel we're on the middle path and everyone's lost.
I know,
And everyone else is confused. Oh my gosh, that celebrity's confused, or that person's on the wrong path. I'm okay. But, you know, I really hope as you're listening to this, everyone, that put yourself in those shoes, put yourself in that mindset. It's a healthy activity to do.
And you can learn something from the extremes also, right? And when you look at the athletes, right? There's a certain extreme mindset that I was gonna say you have to take on. I don't know that you have to take it on. What I do know is that in this society, we worship that mindset that, you know, it's can you become Michael Jordan without that mindset? You know, and that is a really powerful, difficult question. It's like most people can't sustain the mindset. That, you know, fortunately, because it can be so destructive, but most people can't sustain that level of discipline to manifest the things that they want in their life. And there's a poisonous edge to that kind of discipline. And I've been to the edge of that kind of material world discipline in my mind. And I can tell you, you can have a whole lot of stuff and be miserable out there on that edge. And I found a much more comfortable and productive space in my life. And you still need that discipline. But it's like when you use that kind of power to achieve things, it's like there's a brutal reckoning. There's a brutal reckoning at the end of that.
But the amazing thing about you is you've been on that path in that direction. I think people sometimes see these flips where they're like, oh yeah, now that you are rich and successful and famous, now you're going this way. But actually, from our conversations and how you've shared with the family, or even when we've worked with some of the friends in your life, it's like, this has actually been a long process. This isn't just 10, 12 months. This isn't just a couple of years. This has planted a seed from your grandmother through your whole life to always be reminded of it, to study spiritual paths, world religions, to study philosophies. Like, this is just a long process. Tell me about that belief your grandmother had in you, and tell me a bit about how she planted that deep seed, because I think what you said at the beginning, that we need that example, I think everyone, if they really reflected, there'd be someone in their life, either indirectly or directly, but sometimes we forget them. But when we've been talking and everything, your grandmother's been such a pivotal figure. I'd love for you to share what you think she did that was so powerful, because maybe there are some parents listening today, and brothers and sisters and grandmothers and grandparents listening today, and they'll be able to do that for their children and grandchildren.
My father, my mother, and my grandmother, whenever I think about the three of them, I picture a triangle in my mind. And I see, like, my father was the base, as discipline. And my mother didn't care about anything but education. Like that you had to learn, grow, study, travel. Like my mother was really serious about educating the mind. And my grandmother was love and God. My grandmother was that grandmother at Resurrection Baptist Church. And she had, we were doing our Easter recitations and we was at the nativity, So she was that grandmother at the church, and her life was deeply devoted to God and Jesus in the form of loving service, right? So the form that it took was she was working hard to love everybody. I remember my grandmother bringing homeless people into our house when we were little and washing them in our bathtub. I thought that was the nastiest thing. I was like, ah! But she would be in the bathroom with her hands washing homeless people, And as a child, it was like, no! But as I grew older, I just saw how dedicated and devoted she was to living her life in service. It took me 50 years to figure, to figure out what the secret of that was, but there was a day of her life that wasn't devoted to loving and serving, and I just watched her. She worked the graveyard shift at the hospital, and she watched us, my brothers and sisters, during the day while my parents were at work, and then when my parents got off work, then she would take a little nap, and then she would go to work at the hospital, and she was the happiest person that I had ever met. Nothing fazed her. She was okay. And I remember I was about 12 and I had started rapping. And, so I had my rap books. I had all my little curse words and everything in my rap book. And she found my rap book, and she never said anything. And she just opened the cover and she wrote a letter to me. Dear Willard, truly intelligent people do not have to use words like this to express themselves. God has given you the gift of words. Be sure to use those words to uplift people. And I was, I was reading that and just love Gigi.
Yeah.
And, that was part of the reason why I never used profanity in any of my music. Yeah. And it was like, she missionized me in that way to make sure that what I was doing was uplifting others, and when you're telling stories, you can always find the part of the story that is a gift for the potential upliftment of somebody that would see it, so, but yeah, she was all God, all love.
I love that, man. That's such a beautiful story. I hadn't heard that one before.
Oh, we hadn't talked about
Yeah, we hadn't talked about that one.
When your grandmother finds your rap book and you got curse words in it, it's a bad look. It's a bad look.
Well, it's good that you found it that early and that had such an impact on you and brought you out. Where was as you started to grow in that success and that journey, and you decided you wanted everything you do to have a positive impact on others, whether it was music and then movies, and then that journey led you to just tell us about the hard work and graft that went into the creation of what you said earlier, which was like, I was working so hard and my family hated me and this didn't work. But tell us about that hard work, because I think sometimes it's forgotten.
Yeah.
And it's, it's almost like you don't realize how, when I started spending closer time with you and started seeing you on set.
Yeah.
And in the trailer, and then you'd walk out and in 2 seconds you'd be in character.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you'd walk back in and you'd be Will again. and then we were in your man cave and you have the movie plotted out and you'd walk me through like how that tells you what. And I started to understand and appreciate that what you do is a science and it is strategic and systematic and it is a skill you have worked on for decades and decades and decades. You start to realize that the external view of like Will's charismatic and he's cool, and you start to realize like, yes, but that is underpinned with just hard work. And I think that that's a real awakening that a lot of people don't get to experience when they see you on a big screen. Because you don't see all of that there. You don't see the learning of the lines, and you have a phenomenal memory. Like you know, we're studying spiritual books together, and you can remember stuff that you've read that day, and that comes from all your years of training. And even your ability when we first met and you said, Jay, I'm an actor, you know, when we're just direct me and we can do this because I can drop into a student mindset.
Absolutely.
So much of this is internalized. It's not. Tell us a bit about how long it took to learn all of this and start playing with it beyond just thinking, oh yeah, I've got this because I can act.
You know, I grew up in a military household, and you know, while there are certain emotional drawbacks to that, there are intellectual and organizational pluses that are, you know.
I'm more connected to the energy of my future than I am to the energy of my past. I'm believing in my future more than I'm believing in my past.
And a new personality is connected to a new personal reality. So the next question is, does that change the body?
Once the energy's moved, you're gonna feel pretty blessed in that moment. In fact...
So we can transfer guilt, shame, insecurities into bliss? There is so much potential waiting for you if you are able to unlock your mind and your body at the same time. And this is why in this video we bring Joe Dispenza to share some of the greatest lessons on how to do just that. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click the like button, subscribe to this channel, and let me know your biggest takeaway in the comments below.
If you wanted a true relationship where it was fundamentally based on this concept called love. Now let's talk about that because we practice this a lot in the work that we do. If you could truly begin to practice trading those survival emotions every day for elevated emotions, and you practiced opening your heart, it's a skill that has to take place where you move out of survival. So people say, well, I can't open my heart. I can't feel love. And I say, well, what do you practice feeling? Because whatever you practice feeling, you're feeling most of the time. And that feeling could be guilt, but you're so used to it, you wouldn't even know it's guilt. It just feels like you.
Are most people practicing a feeling, or are they just reacting to how they feel?
Well, they're reacting to their external environment.
What's happening?
Or they're reacting to some stray thought in their mind, and every thought produces a chemical. So if they have an unhappy thought, they feel unhappy. If they have a judgmental thought, it produces chemicals that makes you feel polarized, right? So,
how much does one thought change your chemical body?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So let's just we'll put this on hold
okay,
here.
Yes.
So the stronger the emotions that we feel from the problems and conditions in our life, the more altered we feel inside of us, the more we pay attention to what's causing it outside of us. So if you have an event in your life, an experience in your life that has a strong emotional charge to it, and you don't feel like your normal self, you feel this alarm system switch on. You're going to narrow your focus on the cause, and the brain's going to take a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory, right? So then what people don't know is that every time they think about that event, they're producing the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event was occurring. And
that moment.
In that moment. So the highly charged event is actually producing the emotion, and the body is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real experience that's creating the emotion and the emotion that the person is fabricating by thought alone. The body's believing It's so objective, it's believing it's in the same environmental experience. So the highly charged emotional events, some people think of their ex, and the thought of that person
makes them sick.
Makes them feel out of balance. Wow. So,
and one image, one thought in their mind makes them feel out of balance.
So all you need is an image and an emotion, a thought and a feeling, a stimulus and a response, and you're conditioning your body emotionally into the past. So now the memories, and this is just not in the brain now, it's in the body. Okay, so now that thought of that person is actually creating a response in the body that's consuming the body's energy for growth and repair, consuming the body's energy to create, because in survival, it's not a time to create. In survival, it's time to run, fight, and hide. So the problem is that it becomes a subconscious program. It's no longer a conscious process. It now is a subconscious process. So now the body has been conditioned into resentment, into unhappiness, into fear, anxiety, whatever it is. And so back to our concept of bringing love into your life. So you say to that person, okay, open your heart, and they're going to say, are you kidding me? I was injured. Yeah. I was hurt. I'm not going to do that. Let me see your cards first, right? And once I see your cards, then I'll open up a little bit. So we protect this, right? So now in that state of survival, the research shows that the long-term effects of those stress hormones are pushing the genetic buttons that are creating disease. The body can't live in emergency mode for that period of time. So in a sense, the person is making themselves sick by thought alone. Their thoughts are making them sick, literally. So the problem is now the body is conditioned into the past, and it's the mind. Now once the body
is the mind?
The body becomes the mind emotionally. So now all of this energy stored in the body, and now the person now has to leave their unhappiness and step out into the unknown. They have to get out of the familiar feelings that has defined them. So they'll say, I can't really feel joy. I can't really feel love. And what they're really saying is, I've been conditioning my body emotionally so much into the past that I can't feel anything else other than what I know.
Anger, resentment, pain, suffering.
Psychology calls those normal human states of consciousness. Those are altered states of consciousness.
So normal states of consciousness are these kind of negative feelings?
No, I'm saying that those states of survival, people say anger, fear, those are normal things.
Gotcha.
No, those are in survival. Those are altered states. The survival chemicals are actually knocking your brain and body out of balance. You're out of balance in that moment. And if you keep doing that, the imbalance is now the new balance. And now you're altered emotionally. So back to the concept of love. So the person can theoretically, intellectually, philosophically say, oh, I want this type of person. She's got to be this way. He's got to look this way. He's got to be like this. And they're basically saying, I want something that represents all the things that I no longer want, right? And so they're creating with their brain and mind, which is perfect. The problem is that if you can't feel the emotion of your future, your manifestation of love before it's made manifest. Like people say, well, when my relationship happens, when I find Mr. Right, then I'm going to feel love. Like, waiting for the outer environment to change, to take away this feeling of anger, resentment, emptiness. But they forgot that they create reality. In other words, when it finally appears that I'm going to feel love, that's cause and effect. We're waiting for something to happen. If you're feeling the lack and the emptiness, then you're keeping your relationship at arm's length because you don't have the magnetic field to draw to you. So the emotions that come from these energy centers, the lower energy centers in our body, do have frequencies, there's chemistry involved, but they have a different agenda. So now we ask the person, can you teach your body emotionally what the future will feel like before it's made manifest? That means you can't wait for your relationship to feel love. You have to reverse that battleship and understand feeling love now is going to be the magnet. And if you can hold the vision of your future, a clear intention, with a coherent brain, organize signals into the field, and you could actually crack this thing open and practice getting so present in the moment that you're not anticipating the next moment or trying to predict the future. And you're no longer romancing the emotions of your past. You can find that sweet spot of the generous present moment. The familiar past is the known emotionally. The predictable future is the habituation of autopilot, being unconscious, and programs. Those are both knowns. There's only one place where the unknown exists. That's the present moment. So if you could work with your body to the point that it trusts you enough to feel so safe that you have conquered it in a certain way that it could actually relax into the present moment, and it's not worried about what's going to happen next or what's going on around you, or that you need to eat, you need to pee, you need to move. Right. You got beyond all your drives, and you're ready to create. That moment where you're present, if you could begin to work with your heart and start to breathe and start to practice feeling love. In the beginning, it would feel foolish, or gratitude. Why would I feel love if it hasn't happened? Well, that's because you've been hypnotized into waiting for your world to change to feel the emotion from the experience. Wow. But according to the quantum model, your emotion ahead of the experience, when you combine that clear intention with the elevated emotion, and you feel love, your body's so objective that it's actually believing, it's living in that future in the present moment. And your body now is beginning to change. You are beginning to change your biology to reflect what you're about to experience in your future. So the stronger the love you feel, the more altered you feel inside of you, the more you're going to pay attention to that picture in your mind. Stimulus, response, memory, emotion, thought, and feeling. But now, you're remembering your future instead of remembering your past. And biologically, it's actually the same.
How do we, remembering your future as opposed to remembering your past?
Right, it's the same thing biologically.
The body experiences it the same way by thinking and imagining something that hasn't happened yet, but it will happen.
Okay, well,
and imagining something vividly from the past that happened. Sometimes our brains trick ourselves in thinking it happened a different way, doesn't it?
Yeah, but that's incidental. It's none of your business how it happened. In fact,
it's how to interpret it.
Exactly. It's your perception, right? So, so then the stronger the emotion you feel from some outer experience in your life, the more altered you feel, the more the brain freezes the frame and takes a snapshot. Well, now you're freezing a frame in the outer environment. But if you're truly in the present moment and you know exactly what you want, and you begin to teach your body emotion, start practicing opening that heart, it's amazing what happens. The moment that heart begins to open, we've measured this so many times, Lewis, on a scan, on a real-time brain scan. When the heart moves into this kind of rhythm, when you're feeling frustration, when you're feeling impatient, when you're feeling resentment, you are stepping on the gas pedal and you're stepping on the brake at the same time, and the heart is pumping against a closed system, and it causes an erratic beat. It becomes incoherent. And energy literally leaves the heart. Now, you no longer believe in your future. You can't put your heart into your future. You can't trust the outcome because there's no energy there. It's being used and consumed somewhere else, so energy is leaving the brain as well. But once energy starts to move into the heart, we've seen this so many times, and it starts to beat in this rhythm, like banging a drum or dropping a pebble in water, pebble after pebble. The heart begins to create a wave of energy right to the brain, like taking a big sheet and going like that. And then all of a sudden you see this wave, and the brain gets this rush of energy, and that change in brain wave patterns, that wave is carrying information. And the person starts to get a very clear idea. They see their future very clearly. Now that energy is causing them to move into very coherent alpha brainwave patterns, which is the state of creation. This is when you no longer hear the voice in your head that's talking to you, that you listen to and believe is the truth.
I'm not good enough.
Yeah, whatever that is. That's called the default mode. It suppresses the default mode network, and the next thing you know, you start seeing in pictures and images. You start dreaming. And that's the imagination, that's the creative state. So now, you start naturally imagining the heart is the creative center. We gotta put our heart into our future, it better be open and activated. So now, when you start falling in love with your future, oxytocin is released in the brain and in the heart. Oxytocin signals nitric oxide. Nitric oxide signals another chemical called endothelial-derived relaxing factor. And just like when your sexual organs get filled with blood because you're aroused, the same thing happens here as it would happen somewhere else. And literally the arteries in the heart and lungs engorge. And now your heart feels full and it's thumping in order, and you're in the present moment. Now, once that happens, and it's beating in rhythm, the heart produces an external magnetic field up to 3 meters wide. Now, you're in survival, you're drawing from the field and turning it into chemistry. When you get energy in the heart, it's causing a change in the brain, and all of a sudden it's resetting the baseline for trauma, and now here you have a magnetic field. Now the heart is your magnet. It is the center of creation. And now that energy is frequency. And frequency carries information, and you can lay the thought of your new relationship on that energy because it's consistent with it. You cannot lay the thought of your new relationship in need. That's a different energy.
What do you mean in need?
Well, if you're feeling...
I'm needing someone to love me,
yeah,
a
of course, that's a
partner.
different frequency. That's a different energy.
What happens when you're in a need state as opposed to an attraction state?
Well, you're in lack. So now you're trying, you're grasping, you're controlling, you're forcing, you're trying to predict, you're overthinking, overanalyzing, and that's how people live their relationships. So then if you are going to prepare your brain and body for a new relationship, then you would have to become love completely every day. And that signal then that you're sending out into the field can carry the thought of your health, your wealth, your relationship, or whatever. But here's the cool part. When the heart is activated like that, and you feel so whole, so in love with life, so satisfied in the moment, so exuberant, that it's impossible to want. Now you're no longer in lack. Now you're so whole that you will magnetize wholeness in your life. The person who's the person that fits the mold energetically, that would be the same as you and yet complement you, so that the two can become one, right? And then, instead of in contrast, in union, you exchange information equal to that emotional state. In other words, people use each other to reaffirm their dependence on certain emotions. You have certain people you complain with about politics or whatever, they complain back about their lives, and you use each other to reaffirm, you know, some type of
belief or something.
Belief
right?
about life. Emotionally, you have emotional agreements on things. Well, that emotion is energy, and energy is frequency, and frequency carries information. So you share the same energy, you share the same information, but that's what people do in their lives. But now, in a true loving relationship, when you're truly in your heart, then the question is, what would love do in the relationship? And when your heart is open, it's no longer about you. It's about how I feel so amazing with you. I feel even more amazing, but without you, I'm still whole. And so now I'm no longer in need or lack. And so now, when we get together and our fields interfere, when they start interfering, now the amplitude gets way higher and there's way more energy. And now, I mean, I'm all about all 7 centers of the body lining up, all of them. And we're here in a body, let's enjoy it all, but come from love. And so now your heart is so open that you can't do anything else but give. You feel so amazing. You're so happy with yourself, so happy with your life, so happy with what you have, that you want other people to feel the same way. And you say, here, take that. And when you give now, guess what happens? You release more oxytocin, more nitric oxide, and more of those chemicals that cause the heart to swell even more. Then all of a sudden, your immune system gets stronger, and all of a sudden your body starts feeling better, you start having more energy, and now the constructive interference between two people that are coming together in wholeness and no longer dependence or lack or separation or need is a different game. So then what they do to protect, to nurture, to grow, to evolve that love is one of the most important things that they have. Not because they're doing it out of obligation or because they're married or whatever. It's just they can't not do it. And we see people, we had somebody stand the other day in our workshop in profoundly high amounts of gamma. She can do it on command. And there's an incredible arousal that takes place that goes along with these high brain frequencies that you can only describe as ecstasy or bliss. Now, you're getting that ecstasy and bliss not from anyone or anything out there. No drug, no person, no football game, no shopping spree is doing that. It's somehow
inside.
It's coming from within. Like, what is that connection that you have? And so one of the scientists said to this woman, how do you do that? You know what she said? I have difficulty not doing it. I can't not do it when I'm in a it's too when I'm doing this, it's too good. So now that could be a constant feeling in your life. So now,
what, love?
Independent of anyone or anything, it's coming from within you. Okay? So think about this.
Whether you're in a relationship or single.
Doesn't matter. You're whole. Your love is not wavering, it's constant, right? So now imagine having this feeling. And when oxytocin is released, what most people don't know is that it seeps into the amygdala. And there's certain survival emotions in the amygdala: fear and anxiety, aggression and anger, pain and suffering. And it literally shuts the lights out in those circuits in the amygdala. And there's only one thing left: love and joy, right? So now this person is suppressing the survival centers, resetting the baseline of the past, how they perceive the past. And now the research on oxytocin shows that when you have just a slight level of increase, and our research shows our students are way outside of normal, that it's impossible to hold a grudge. You know why? Because the feeling feels so good. Why would you judge another person, or why would you react to some condition and lose that feeling? You figure it out really fast. So this birth of unconditional love really says, I'm in love with myself, my connection to some divine intelligence within me. And because I'm so in love with life and with myself, I'm looking at life through the lens of love, which means I'm going to allow you to be whoever you want around me. I don't really, I'm no longer...
I'm not a reaction.
I'm not a reaction because I've overcome my fear, I've overcome my anger, and now I'm ready for love. And now that relationship that you have, if you find that equal, that's a needle in the haystack, because now it's a vibrational match.
Right.
And so as long as you're evolving, as long as I'm evolving, as long as we're sharing the same ideals, as long as we're working together, as long as we have our independence, and as long as we come together and we bring our best, and I say to you, how was your day? I mean, what did you learn? Or let's start our day. So how are you going to be today? Come on, let's just support each other. So what are the programs you're going to stay away from? Are you going to rush? You know, what did you do yesterday that you want to improve today? How can I support you? How can I love you in that? You want to text at noon? What do you need? And then, how am I going to be? Okay, tell me how you vocalize it, articulate it, so that now I understand your intention and I can support. That's good. And so then, when the person can articulate it, what are they doing? They're rehearsing in their mind who they're going to be, and so now they're becoming conscious of that future. And then they have to work on staying conscious of their unconscious programs, and by articulating that, they're going to not let those thoughts slip by as well. So then, now you have two people in evolution. It's no longer about all the other things. It's not about the money. It's not about the sex. It's not about the weight. It's not about the diet. Those are all things that we already know. This is something else. This is a whole nother level where when you exchange and evolve on this level, it's the most important thing, because now you see that person as a mirror. Oh my God, she did amazing. I'm in love with her. I admire her. Wow, she's got it going on. She executed today. She got her behaviors to match her intentions, and I want to celebrate her. Like wow, I'm in awe. That to me, you don't work on that. You work on you. Everybody works on themselves, and then they bring their best. And if they're not at their best, excuse yourself and get back to your best. And if you tell me it's that person or that circumstance, we went back to the unconscious program of being a victim. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with reacting. But the next question is, how long?
I'm going to stay in this mode.
Right. Or do you want help getting out?
Right.
Yeah, right? So I think that when you start feeling those elevated emotions and your energy is synchronized right? And you got a Wi-Fi signal.
Right.
You got a signal.
You're connected. You're 5G. You're connected.
And you're
whatever.
connected. And what are you connected in? In this sense of wholeness, this sense of love, this sense of joy, this satisfaction with yourself and your life. And when I watch this, Louis. I mean, people come to our events for all kinds of reasons. Some people come for health. Some people come for wealth. Some people come for relationships. It's really funny, and they show up. Angry people. They're angry with themselves. When they're angry with themselves, they'll be impatient and angry with others. People who are unhappy with themselves will punish other people so that they can feel their unhappiness.
Or is it to get their anger out, or is it why?
No, because that's who they are. That's the emotion that's driving their behaviors. People who are in love with themselves will find love in others. People who are happy with themselves will find something that they can connect with. They won't see all the flaws. They'll see some part of them that they want to enjoy. I mean, so if you're in a relationship and you've scrubbed the cupboard and you've taken out all those skeletons and you've looked at them and you said, I don't want to bring this into my relationship. I don't want my insecurity to be there. I don't want my fear to be there. I don't want my judgment to be there. I don't want my emotions from other relationships to be there. So let me finish this. In other words, if you want love in your life, in your future, then you better take care of your frustration, because you can't bring that there. You got to leave it. So then you may say to me, well, it's because that person and this emotion from 15 years ago, my ex, makes me feel frustrated. Well, let me tell you something. The only reason that you're thinking about your ex is because you're still in frustration. You overcome frustration. You'll look back at your ex and you'll be like, I wish them well.
Yeah.
I'm not connected to my past any longer. So cleaning the cupboards and getting down to those thoughts that slip by people's awareness all the time, their behaviors, how they complain, they make excuses, they say it'll never happen. What do? And the emotions that keep them connected to their past, they won't even see that person. That they'll walk right past their future relationship. They'll never recognize that person because they're looking at their future through the neurology and the chemistry of their past.
Wow.
And the brain only learns we only see reality based on pattern recognition. I memorize your face, now I know Louis. And if the pattern matches, I know. But if you're creating a future, and you're not clear on that future, and you want all these things, but you haven't addressed all those circuits and behaviors and emotions and chemicals of the past, you won't recognize the pattern. You'll walk right past the relationship. You'll never see it. So I think that there's the preparation for the relationship, the overcoming, and overcoming and overcoming and overcoming and overcoming and becoming. All of a sudden now says, I am worthy. And the universe only gives us what we think we're worthy of receiving. So when you're worthy to receive, it's not going to be on Match.com when you're looking at body parts and whatever else. This is going to be like ka-ching.
An energy connection.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like that came out of nowhere, because when you're in survival, and you're in separation, and you're in lack, and you're forcing and controlling and trying to predict outcomes, you're matter trying to change matter. And of course, it's going to take time for this to happen, because you're creating in three-dimensional reality, and everything in three-dimensional reality takes time. But when you're creating from the heart, with a coherent brain and a coherent heart, and you got that 5G Wi-Fi signal, it's not like you go anywhere now. The experiences are coming to, you're drawing the event to you. So we spend a lot of time bonding with our future emotionally. I have colleagues of mine who look at our data on oxytocin, and they're like, listen, oxytocin levels go up during, in a relationship, the honeymoon stage of a relationship, and monogamy is created because of those chemicals, or a female mammal is bonding with her offspring. That's exactly right. I want our people, our students, to bond and fall in love with their future just like they do with somebody else. And when you're bonded to your future, no person, no circumstance, no thing is going to remove you from it. So then, if you fall from grace during the day, then the next question is, what person, what circumstance caused me to disconnect from my love in the future? And let me rehearse in my mind, if I have that same circumstance, how I'm going to overcome it. And now you're worthy of love. It's no longer the person or the event. It's just you're doing what it takes to stay in the emotion of your future. Your body is aligned emotionally to that future. So great doing it with a meditation. That's easy. But now the real game is open your eyes. Open your eyes.
It's happening.
Open your eyes and be in the initiation of life and stay in that place and just know that your future is going to happen. So being able to activate the heart and breathe in there and get the body out of survival and start working with it like it feels safe enough to create. Once energy makes it here, you're going to get some really good ideas. Yeah. You're going to see things you never thought of seeing. You're going to feel things you never thought you'd feel. And the images that you're creating, what are they doing? The thoughts that you're creating, they're making more of those chemicals. And now you're feeling more of the feeling of your future before it happens. You're giving your body a sampling, a taste of the future before it's happened. Keep doing that enough times, and that feeling is going to become very familiar to you.
Now, you've been working with teaching people how to heal themselves with their minds, right? Overcome disease, overcome any type of chronic illness or pain through the mind, the principle of the mind. I grew up in a religion called Christian Science that did not use medicine. I didn't get vaccinations when I was a kid. My dad wouldn't let me go to the hospital. He wanted to use thought, prayer, the mindset to overcome any pain or any physical ailment. And so this is something that I was learning in a different way as an early kid. When did you start to learn about this philosophy or principle or truth and start applying it to your life?
Well, I got run over by a truck in a triathlon in 1986 on the biking portion of a race. I broke 6 vertebrae in my spine, and I was told that I'd never walk again. And so the typical surgical procedure for multiple compression fractures with cord impingement is this surgery called Harrington rod surgery. And in my case, they were going to cut off the backs of parts of my vertebrae from the base of my neck to the base of my spine. And then they screw in these long stainless steel rods, and when you screw those rods into the vertebrae, it acts like a cantilever. It lifts the spinal column off the cord. But the prognosis was I probably wouldn't walk again, and that the surgery was hopeful that it would give me some relief. And I think if it was any other patient, Louis, besides me, I probably would have recommended the surgery, but this was me, you know?
Sure.
And I just couldn't rush into it. So I had 4 opinions, you know, from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, and they were adamant that I needed this surgery.
All 4 of them?
All 4 of them. Yeah, in fact, the medical director of Scripps Hospital at the time was my surgeon. And he thought I had a head injury, or he thought, you know, that I had PTSD, that I wasn't just following his instruction. Anyway, I decided against the surgery, and I thought, well, listen, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. I'm basically laying face down. And I thought, well, there's an intelligence that's giving us life, that's keeping our heart beating and digesting our food. It really knows how to heal way better than me. This innate intelligence is what's giving us life. And I thought, well, if it's an intelligence, it's a consciousness. And consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So it must be paying attention to me. So I said, look, maybe I'll just spend the rest of my time trying to connect to this intelligence and give it a plan, give it a design, give it a template. And when I was really present and complete with that design, I would surrender this creation to this greater mind and allow it to do the healing for me. And the other thing I said is I'm not going to let any thought slip by my awareness that I don't want to experience. Now that sounds really easy, right? But when you're faced with crisis or trauma, we tend to focus on what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen. So I started on this journey. I decided against the surgery, and it was a big revolution at the time. And I went through 6.5 weeks of hell. I just could not get my mind to do what I wanted it to do, because I'd start reconstructing my vertebrae and imaging an outcome, and then I'd start thinking, I'm going to be living in a wheelchair, or should I sell my practice?
So you were thinking about the way you wanted your body to look and feel in your mind.
I reconstructed every single
in
vertebrae.
The mind.
Yeah, in my mind. I wanted to show it exactly 3-dimensionally. Yeah.
In your mind.
In my mind.
You're not drawing it out or
no. In my mind, I was reconstructing.
You're visualizing it.
Yeah, visualizing it. And I wanted to say, look, take a look at that, because this intelligence is always present, right? So we got to be present with it. So I'd start off reconstructing my spine, and then I'd be like, oh gosh, should I sell my practice? What if I live in a wheelchair?
And you practice chiropractic practice at the time?
Yeah, in Southern California, in La Jolla. So I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted to do, and then after 6 weeks, I just went through the whole thing, and I felt like I hit a golf ball right in the sweet spot. Something clicked, and from that point forward, what took me 2.5 or 3 hours to do, I was able to do in 45 minutes. I was firing and wiring, these new circuits, and I was practicing paying attention. And then all of a sudden, I started noticing dramatic changes in my health like this. And the moment I started noticing changes in my body, what was going on outside of me, I started correlating at what I was doing inside of me. Now I was just hooked, and I just started doing it with more passion and more sincerity. Anyway, back on my feet in 10.5 weeks, back training at 12 weeks, back in my clinic, and I just made a deal with myself that if I was ever able to walk again, I'd spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection and mind over matter. And then that led me to just stop everything in my life. I just wasn't the same guy. I'd just been initiated into something, and sold my practice, sold my home.
You sold it all.
Sold it all, moved to the Northwest, and just started asking bigger questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What are we doing? What happens when we die? And how did all this happen for me? What was the process? So I started studying the science behind it, and I couldn't find it in any conventional textbooks because this was unconventional, right? And miraculous is kind of unconventional. So I started studying quantum physics and neuroscience and epigenetics, and it started making sense. I started building this model of understanding. Then I asked the fundamental question, has anybody else done it? So then I traveled to 17 different countries and interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people with serious health conditions that were treating either conventionally or unconventionally. They were staying the same or getting worse, and all of a sudden they got better. So what was the cause that produced the effect, And the stories and what I learned was so amazing. I went back to school and studied neuroscience because mind was such a strong element. It wasn't diet, it wasn't celibacy, it wasn't any of those things. It was just really this element. And so then I was able to figure out that there were 4 common things. And then I wrote a book about it, and then I thought, God, if this works really on people that were sick and are better, and they come from all walks of life, all colors, all races, all genders, sexual preferences, but all of a sudden, I wanted to see if I was able to reproduce it. So then I started seeing, okay, let's see if we can teach this, be able to reproduce the outcome, because that's science, right? So I went through about...
What were the 4 common things?
The first one was that they all believed and accepted that there was an intelligence that lived within them that was giving them life. And
these people you interviewed who had had injuries that overcame them?
No, these are people with cancer, MS, lupus, Parkinson's disease.
Who got better?
Yeah, just spontaneously. It's called a spontaneous remission.
So they believed there was an intelligence.
There was some invisible life force that they were connected to, that they felt like they had lost their connection to. They became separate and disconnected from. And that when they got the diagnosis, they woke up and said, man, I got to connect again, and I got to connect to my essence. And so they developed a relationship with it, just like you develop a relationship with anybody. It takes time, you got to be present, you got to connect, you got to experience, you got to be present. All of these things are important elements. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that they realized that it was the mismanagement of their emotions and the hormones of stress that really began to create their condition. Now, stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. Stress is when your body's knocked out of homeostasis. We have an innate mechanism in our body that returns us back to order. So then if someone cuts you off on the LA freeway, you have an emotional reaction, but 15 minutes later you're back to driving and you're over it, right? That's all organisms in nature can tolerate short-term stress.
But when it's all day long, all week, all year.
Yeah, so if you're reacting to, like if Tyrannosaurus Rex is chasing you, you have to make a decision. Am I going to use 20% of my energy or am I going to use 100%? So it turns out when you're reacting to traffic...
200%.
Oh, right, or if you're reacting to your coworker sitting in the cubicle next to you,
right.
You're turning on that response, and what was once very adaptive becomes very maladaptive, because when you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for disease, because nobody can live in emergency mode for that extended period of time. Well, human beings, we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. You can think about your problems, and you're producing the same biological effects. So those chemicals give the brain and body a rush of energy. And people become addicted to that rush of energy. So now they use the problems and conditions in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion. They need the bad job. They need the poor relationship. So that means they become addicted to the life that they don't even like. Right?
Why do we need the bad job or bad relationship and stay stuck in those?
Because it's a conditioned response. So listen, if you get angry at a coworker and all of a sudden you get an arousal in your brain and body, right? You get a rush of energy. When you start noticing that your body starts dropping, your brain starts noticing your energy starts dropping, you're automatically going to have the image of the coworker in order to what? Give your body the next jolt, right? So all of a sudden people become addicted to their own thoughts, right? So these people realize that, oh my God, I've been mismanaging my attention and energy, and I gotta get beyond my past. I got to get beyond these emotions. I got to make some big changes. I got to break the habit of being myself. You know, I got to stop being this person. Now, that sounds really good theoretically and philosophically, but change is such a hard thing, right? Because the moment you come back to your senses and you step back into your life and you see that person, or you go to that place, or you're with that experience, so many people are unconsciously reacting in their thoughts and feelings to everything in their environment. So now their environment is controlling how they think and feel. So they realize that in order to change,
you got to change the environment.
They got to be greater than their environment, greater than the conditions in the world, greater than the circumstances.
Be mindful of that every time it comes up. To be like, okay, I'm going to think differently.
Right.
I'm not going to react this way.
I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to go back, because the moment you start reacting emotionally, emotions are a record of the past. And if those emotions are driving your thoughts, you're thinking in the past. And if you can't think greater than how you feel, and you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, you're creating more of your past, right? So it turns out that the repetition of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking, these loops that people get caught in, condition their body to subconsciously become the mind of that emotion. Which means now their body, as their unconscious mind, is believing they're living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. What's the relevance behind that? Well, the latest research on genes says genes don't create disease. It's the environment that signals the gene that creates disease.
The emotional environment or the physical environment?
Your environment, any environmental reaction. But if you're reacting emotionally to your environment the same way, you're signaling the same gene in the same way, and now you're headed for a genetic destiny. So the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease. If you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, your thoughts could make you sick. And if your thoughts could make you sick, is it possible that your thoughts could make you well? So they began to realize that, oh my God, the repetition of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking caused me to feel guilt, and I don't even know it's guilt, it just feels like me. It's just, I'm used to the same chemical continuity. Now, the moment they decided to change, anytime you decide to change and change anything about yourself, get ready, because it's going to feel uncomfortable.
It's going to hurt.
You're going to leave the known.
Yeah.
You're going to leave the familiar, and you're going to step into the unknown.
Even if the familiar is uncomfortable and painful,
right?
It's still going to be painful leaving the pain.
Right, because some people are super happy being unhappy.
Right.
So then they would rather cling to their suffering than take a chance in possibility. So these people said, I really have nothing to lose, right? So then they said, I'm willing to be uncomfortable and be in the unknown. And it turns out that's the perfect place to create from. So when the body is conditioned to become the mind, then to change is to be greater than the body, right?
Because how do we become greater than the body?
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But let me finish this, okay? So the third thing they said was, okay, so now that I know that I got to break the habit of being myself, and I can't mismanage my thoughts and feelings, I got to change how I act, I got to watch how I speak, I got to become conscious of how unconscious I am, because 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors, like a computer program, emotional reactions, unconscious beliefs and perceptions. So the first step to change is to become conscious of how you think, to notice how you act, to pay attention to how you feel. And the act of observing those states of mind and body separates you from that program. Now you're the consciousness observing that program. It turns out the more conscious you become of how unconscious you are, lighting a match in a dark place, that first step creates enormous amounts of chaos in the brain and body. And it's disturbing, so people just go back to the same addiction, the same emotion, the same problem. This feels better. No, that feels familiar. So they said, okay, now I got to change. I got to reinvent myself. Now this is really important, because they started sitting down and thinking, okay, who in history do I admire? Who are great people, role models that I could follow? What are the qualities and characteristics that they have? how am I going to change? These are what we call frontal lobe questions. The creative center of the brain switches on, and the emotional center settles down. So then they started thinking, how would I have to be in a new life if I was really going to heal? What would I have to change about myself? Now, there's this interesting phenomenon that if you close your eyes and you begin to think about doing something, you're an athlete, you understand this. If you're a background in football and you are running a pattern or you are doing something, you would rehearse it in your mind.
Yeah.
Turns out that the act of mentally rehearsing something when you're truly present, your brain does not know the difference between what's going on out there and what's going on in here. In fact, your brain will begin to look like you've been doing it for the last 5 days and you've never run the course. So now your brain is no longer a record of the past, because typically it is. Now it's a map to the future. So now you're priming your brain. So that became the very platform. Experiments with piano players. You take a group of people that never played the piano before. You divide them into 2 different categories. You take one group of people, you teach them one-handed scales and chords. You do a brain scan on them. They come and practice for 2 hours a day for 5 days. At the end of 5 days, if you rescan the brain, they grow new circuits on the opposite side of the brain. Nothing magical there. You learn something new. Learning's making new connections. Get some instruction. You get instruction. You get your body involved. You get your body involved, you're going to have an experience. Experience enriches the brain. Pay attention to what you're doing. You got to pay attention and repeat it. Firing and wiring. You're going to assemble new circuits. You can take the other group of people, have them come for 2 hours a day for 5 days, do a brain scan before, the brain scan after. Have them close their eyes and mentally rehearse playing those scales and chords. At the end of 5 days, they'll grow the same amount of circuits in their brain as the people who actually physically demonstrated the action. What does that mean? It means not only do they change their brain by thinking differently, but their brain looks like they've been playing the piano for 5 days. Now set them in front of a piano. Never played the piano before. They'll play those scales and chords because their brain is wired to play it. So now, the act of rehearsing who they're going to be, what are the qualities, and beginning to get in this creative state, began to lay down the circuits of a new personality. And a new personality is connected to a new personal reality. So the next question is, does that change the body? Take a group of men, have them do one-handed curls in their mind, and bring an emotional component like stronger, harder, more intense. 1 hour a day for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, 13.5 increase in muscle strength.
Wow.
Never lifted a weight. Now their body is changing by thought alone. So these people began to reprogram their brain and body. And all of a sudden, they began to act differently. Why? Because they installed the circuits. They began to think differently, of course. They began to feel differently. They were no longer feeling pain. They're actually liking themselves, right? So then if they're living by a different emotion, and they're feeling an elevated emotion before they're healing, before they were healed, they're not waiting for their healing to feel joy and gratitude. They're feeling gratitude and joy. Now their body's believing that it's healed because the body's feeling the emotion ahead of the experience. And if the environment signals the gene and the end product of an experience in the environment is emotion, you're signaling the gene ahead of the environment. And what do genes do? Genes make proteins. And what are proteins responsible? The structure and function of the body. Now you're literally becoming somebody else. And now you're turning down the genes for disease and you're turning up these other genes. So I started to realize that this reinvention process is exactly what we've always done. It's just that we get complacent in certain areas of our life and we stop. Now the last thing they had in common, the fourth thing, is that when they were doing that rehearsal process, that they had long moments where they lost track of time and space. In other words, they were so involved in their inner world of imaging that when they turn the light on in the room or they lift their blindfold up or whatever they were doing, they thought it was 20 minutes later, and it was an hour and 20 minutes later. And when you're truly focused and you're truly paying attention and you're in the present moment, all of a sudden, you will leave this three-dimensional reality. And when you leave this three-dimensional reality, there's only one other place you go, and that is the realm of thought, and that's called the quantum field. And that quantum field is where all possibilities exist, right? So they were connecting to a field of information that had everything to do with the first principle, which is that invisible intelligence that's both within us and all around us, personal and universal. It is the unifying field that governs everything material in this world. And if you're going to change something material, that means you got to get beyond your body to heal your body.
Right.
Because if you're your body trying to heal your body, there's one thing that we can guarantee: it's going to take time. It's going to just take a long time because you're playing by the rules of Newtonian physics. You play by the rules of quantum physics. Energy dictates matter. So when you're truly in the field and you're making changes there, then the downward cascade neurologically, biologically, chemically, hormonally, genetically is the side effect of what's happening in the field.
It accelerates.
It accelerates it, exactly. So you do it in less time because you're more connected to a realm that doesn't play by time.
How quickly can we heal something that's been inside of our body, inside of our mindset for decades that we've never let go of?
Yeah.
And it's a part of us. How quick are we able to do that from past trauma?
Yeah. Well, here's the deal with trauma, and it's kind of an interesting thing because when you're traumatized, some threat or some danger or some condition in your outer world through your senses is changing how you feel in your inner world. And the quotient of change between the way you normally feel in some alarm state, when you change your internal state and move into that emergency mode, you narrow your focus on the cause, and the brain freezes an image and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. And now that image is branded holographically into the brain. So then we remember experiences better because we can remember how they feel, and that memory then changes the person's biology. So they think neurologically within the circuits of that experience, and they feel chemically within the boundaries of those emotions, and how we think and feel becomes our state of being. So now the person biologically is changed, and many times it's the strong emotion that begins to select and instruct the gene that creates disease. Why?
Yeah.
Because if the environment signals the gene, and that's a truth, that's epigenetics, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, the emotion that you feel from that event is literally selecting the gene for you to begin to change. And the genes make proteins. And so the person, if it's strong enough, begins to wear their trauma, not just in their brain. Now it's in their body, because every time they think about that trauma, every time they review it, every time they keep creating the imagery, they keep firing and wiring the circuits in their brain, and they keep feeling the feeling emotionally in their body. And their body is so objective that it's believing it's living in the same past experience 50 to 100 times a day. And all you need is a stimulus and a response, an image and an emotion, a thought and a feeling, and you're conditioning the body into the past. Well, you're conditioning the brain and body into the past.
And it doesn't matter if the actual event happened to you or not, because if you have the image, what I'm hearing you say, it's still going to connect to the body. So like what's happening right now is people are consuming probably more than 50, 100 pieces of media talking about trauma in the world right now.
Right.
Is that causing more physical damage on our bodies without actually having it physically hurt us?
Well, let me finish that thought, and
Yes,
then
go
we
ahead.
can answer that question.
Mind-blowing.
So then you asked, is it possible then that people can heal that quickly in 1 week? Yeah, because what if they create an inner event that carries an amplitude of gratitude or joy or freedom, break through from the chains of the past? And when the body is liberated and you feel that elevated emotion, the stronger the emotion you feel from that breakthrough, the more you're going to pay attention to the image in your mind. And now you're beginning to brand new circuitry in the brain, and your body's being conditioned into a new future. And the stronger the emotion you feel, and the more you pay attention to the picture, the more you're conditioning the body over time to the future instead of the past. So now you keep knocking on that genetic door emotionally, then that emotion ultimately signals a new gene that upregulates that gene to produce better proteins. And the person then all of a sudden starts healing. And we have research to show that people can do that in 4 days, signal genes to reduce cancer cells and growth, to signal stem cells to suppress, to go to active tissues and repair them and regenerate them and suppress inflammation. We have research to show that you could change the number of brain cells you have just by doing this properly. And so now all of a sudden, the person starts changing.
In 4 days,
yeah,
you can start to reverse some of the damage you've done in your body, depending on the degree of damage, it sounds like, but in 4 days, by simply replacing the imagery, the visualization, the acknowledgement to a different emotion, an emotion of joy, gratitude, peace, perspective, acceptance. I'm assuming these things.
A vision of your future.
A vision of what you want that's
in your
positive,
future.
as opposed to a vision that is tied to a negative event of the past over and over every single moment of the day. Your body will start to heal, your immune system will start to heal, and you'll start to shift your genes.
Gene expression, absolutely.
What's the difference between gene expression and just genes?
Well, you know, you come with a lot of genes, and they're just a library of potentials. They're just a storehouse of information, of possibilities. So then you got to get the right signal, the right lock into the key that begins to select and instruct genes that cause genes to make different proteins. And you can regulate so many different genes, the same genes, you can regulate them differently. So when they upregulate, they start producing really healthy and robust proteins. And that's enzymes, that's tissue, that's structure, that's function, that's hormones. It's immunoglobulins. When they downregulate because of some alarm, when there's not a lot of energy for long-term building projects, well, then you keep doing that. Then the body starts producing cheaper proteins. It's a different signal. It's not a time for growth. And so now to answer your other question, then it makes sense then that if you have been if you had experience of trauma, say, for example, and it's created the feeling of fear, and your fear is that it could happen again. And you don't know this, but every time you think about that future, that possible worst case scenario, and you feel the emotion, you're conditioning your body to become the mind subconsciously of anxiety. So now, all you need now is some cue in your outer environment that says it's unsafe, that there's damage there, that you're a victim, something's bigger than you that could have an effect on you. Well, now that feeling of fear is going to cause you to think thoughts equal to it. So the person then no longer needs the environment to feel that fear. They just have to have the thought about that condition now. And now they're literally knocking their brain and body out of balance by thought alone. And the body's constantly living in emergency mode. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of resources to live in emergency mode all the time. And guess what system becomes compromised by it?
Immune system.
Your immune system. Why? Because you have two protection systems. You got a system that protects you from dangers in your outer world. That's the gas pedal. That's the sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight or flight nervous system. Danger, threat out there. Use all the energy because you gotta survive. And when you survive, you got to take care of your body. So so now that system can work really well short term. It doesn't work really well if you keep it on all the time. Because if you're mobilizing all that energy for some threat in your outer world, there's no energy in your inner world for growth and repair. There's no energy for long-term building projects. And energy leaves the brain and it leaves the heart and it moves into these lower centers because now you're tapping the body's resources because there is an emergency. But whether the emergency is real or imagined, whether your anger is valid or justified or not, that you're tapping the body's very energy to heal by doing this. And the immune system says, well, we're part of really the other nervous system. We're the brake, we're the clutch. We need to get into relaxation. We need to get back into balance again. And when we do, then we'll metabolize, then we'll assimilate, we'll reproduce, we'll excrete properly. So now you got this kind of battle between the gas pedal and the brake, and the immune system says, hey, listen, if there's foreign agents, if there's viruses, bacteria, molds, funguses, listen, we don't have a whole lot of energy here to deal with them because we're fighting this war out there. There's no homeland security. So they shut down certain receptors in the immune system. They shut down function of those lymphocytes, those white blood cells that are your inner army of protection. And it takes a lot of energy to fight a virus and a bacteria. But if there's no energy, hey, listen, it takes energy to raise the body's temperature. Where do you think that comes from? That's part of that branch called the autonomic nervous system. And the sympathetic, the gas pedal, is part of it. And the parasympathetic is the clutch, is part of that autonomic nervous system. And it's a check and balance. But so you stay in emergency for an extended period of time. And now you're exposed to some antigen or some external substance, some foreign agent, and there's no energy to deal with it, then you are victim to your environment, because every time you react to your environment and you say that person, that circumstance is controlling the way I feel and the way I think, If something outside of you is controlling your feelings and thoughts, then it makes you a victim to your environment. So then, so you will be more victimized, or more, you could be more of a victim to other things in your environment. People don't understand this consciously because it's a program subconsciously. So now, if you begin to strengthen your inner environment now, this is where our work comes in, because we have research to show that when you place your attention right here in your heart, this center right here, this is the beginning of our divinity. This is our center of oneness, our wholeness. This is where we begin to feel love, gratitude, compassion, kindness, care, freedom, joy. It's all these elevated emotions that are heartfelt emotions. That our research shows that when you begin to teach people how to open this center, and you teach them a formula on how to practice it, that if they did that for 4 days, that they would begin to strengthen their immune system by 50%. And now let me tell you why. Because in the center is your heart, but what most people don't know, there's another gland in there called the thymus gland. Thyme leaf, it's named after the thyme leaf. And the thymus gland has two functions. It has an endocrinological function. It makes growth hormone. That's our youth center. And it makes strong immune chemicals, and it has an immunological function. So when you're living by stress and your heart is racing and you're stepping on the gas and the brake at the same time because you can't run, you can't fight, you can't hide, and you got the gas and the clutch going, energy is going to leave the heart and it's going to the adrenal center, and you're going to cause contraction in the arteries in your heart, and this center will shut down from blood flow. And so there's no energy in the heart. So you teach a person then how to begin to open the center and to start feeling elevated emotions through their heart. And you teach them how to switch or convert from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system. Well, all of a sudden now, this thymus gland, which normally shrinks with age, starting at puberty, the fountain of youth now, all of a sudden begins to get new blood flow. And there's new hormones that are signaled, like oxytocin and vasopressin, and all these different chemicals called nitric oxide and endothelial-derived relaxing factor, and the arteries in the heart begin to swell with energy and blood flow. And this center switches on, and now it says, man, this feels good. And this is a time for us to really get back into balance and really let's strengthen our inner world now. And now all of a sudden, this thymus gland begins to make thymosin, which is an important agent that begins to make T cells. And T cells have little receptors on them called T cell receptors. And when those T cell receptors are robust and strong, those cells make proteins, and they make what's called antibodies or immunoglobulins. And these little Y-shaped proteins block the receptors coming from the virus that are trying to attack the white blood cells. They have a shield, and now they're immune to the virus and its attack with its receptor. And it can literally begin to inject it with these immunoglobulins, primarily immunoglobulin A. And that begins to cause the virus to not survive. And then that white blood cell will pass another white blood cell and pass on the memory to it, so it already knows what's coming. So now, all of a sudden, you're making these immunoglobulins, and now your inner world now can combat anything that's a foreign agent.
Why is this stuff really taking off now in the last year and a half? Because you've been doing this work for a couple decades now, right?
Yeah.
2 decades?
Yeah, just about, yeah.
Almost 2 decades. And you've been in tons of documentaries, movies, you've been doing interviews for a long time, but really it's taken off in the last year. And you said, because now we have evidence about a lot of things that you're working on, the things that you've been believing for so many years that you knew worked for you, and you saw transformation with yourself. We're not going to go into your accident because that's in the last interview. But now we have proof and evidence and science backing all this. And how did that start to happen?
Yeah, it's a great dialogue because I think this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And if you rewind the tape 10 years ago, you know, information was the thing that stimulated thought, stimulated new ideas. And as we learn new things, we make new connections in our brains. So as we begin to add new stitches into that three-dimensional tapestry in our mind, we're beginning to cause our mind to function in new ways. But the key then is to apply it, to personalize it, to do something with it. And 10 years ago, when I got in front of an audience and talked about the application, nobody wanted to step outside that philosophical, theoretical, intellectual realm, right? Because doing something means you're going to have to change something about yourself.
Painful.
Yeah, you're going to get uncomfortable, right? And I think we're in an age of information. And in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. And because of technology, we have access to so much content. And information creates awareness. And awareness is consciousness. And you can't have consciousness without energy. They work together. So there's an energetic change, I think, that's taking place in the world right now where people are so informed that old models, old paradigms are beginning to break down, whether it's the medical model or the religious model, the education model, journalism, the economy, you know, politics. It's all beginning to come to the surface because something else has to come out. And I think that one of the things that people are realizing is that you don't have to be a Buddhist monk to do this or a nun with 40 years of devotion. You just got to understand the formula. And just like any skill or anything you learn, you got to go from thinking to doing to being. You got to take knowledge, you create the experience, and if you keep doing it over and over again, you start getting a skill or you start getting wise about how to do it. And you know that you know how to do it. Well, in the last 10 years, we have assembled a scientific team. And let's see if you can really make significant brain changes. I don't want those changes to just be in your mind. I want them to be in your brain. I want to be able to see before and after pictures to say that person has a significant change after a traumatic brain injury or anxiety or depression or a cyclic mood disorder or a stroke. We want to see that there's been significant change. At the same time, let's measure your brain in real time and let's look to see what that transformation process looks like. And in the discovery, Lewis, of that process, we gained so much knowledge about what that transformational process looks like. In other words, I can tell you without a doubt that if you're analyzing your life right now within some disturbing emotion, that 100% of the time you're going to make your brain worse.
If you think about your life,
if you're stuck in an emotion, like you're frustrated, you're angry, you're fearful, resentful, and you're thinking within that emotional state. In other words, you can't think greater than how you feel. That means then you were thinking in the past because those emotions are a record or residue of the past. So we see people in the process of change that are analyzing in duality or polarity. That kind of drives the brain into higher states of arousal and further away from true change. So we've done thousands and thousands and thousands of brain scans, and we now know that there's a formula to create greater brain coherence, greater brain efficiency, to make your brain work better. And when your brain works better, you work better. At the same time, it requires a clear intention and an elevated emotion to begin to change your energy and to change your life. And nobody changes until they change their energy, right? So then how do you get a person out of resentment, frustration, into joy and freedom? Why would they feel grateful or joyful or free if the experience hasn't happened? So most people are spending the majority of their life waiting for something out there to take away their emptiness or pain or the resentment in here. Well, if they're waiting their whole life in separation or lack, then and we create reality, then the lack is driving certain thoughts, which is creating more separation and more lack. So teaching people then to begin to condition their body emotionally before the evidence takes place in their life is breaking a significant habit, right? Yes. So instead of living by cause and effect, now we're beginning to cause and effect. So the moment you start feeling whole and grateful, we now know your healing will begin at that moment.
Yes.
The moment you start feeling worthy and abundant, your wealth is coming. You know, you're generating a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of wealth. And so
how does someone feel worthy though if they've always been told they're not worth it?
Yeah, well, so
or that's the story they tell themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not worth it because
Yeah.
she didn't say yes when I asked her on a date.
Right.
Because he broke up with me, because I got fired, because my parents left me. How am I worth it when there's so much evidence or story around a negative thing?
Let's stop telling the story of your past and let's start telling the story of your future. And people who aren't defined by a vision of the future, for the most part, are left with memories of the past. Your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact of everything you've learned and experienced in this moment. So most people wake up in the morning and they start thinking about their problems. And those problems are memories that are tattooed in the brain that are associated to certain people and things at certain times and places. So the person wakes up clean slate, they start thinking about the problems they're thinking in the past. If you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, well, there's a possibility that your past is going to be your future. Every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So then the moment you start recalling the problem, you start feeling unhappy. Now your body's in the past, because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. So people reaffirm their identity based on the past, right? And it turns out that the redundancy of doing that, conditioning only requires an image and an emotion. And most people are unconsciously conditioning their body into the familiar past, into the known. So now if you're in the familiar past and in the known, you're going to crave the predictable future, right? That's the known as well. And there's only one place where the unknown exists, and that's the eternal present moment. That's the sweet spot of the generous present moment. So you gotta labor to get that person beyond the emotions that keep them tacked or anchored to the past. And yes, it takes an effort to do that, but if you keep working with the formula, you'll reach that elegant moment where there's a liberation of energy. And now your body, as the unconscious mind, the objective mind, is not believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, because you're liberating the body from that emotional state. So you ask a person, why are you so unhappy? Why are you so frustrated? Why are you so resentful? The moment you ask that, their brain is going to associate that emotion to a past event.
To a memory.
To a memory.
Yeah.
That's because they have nothing to look forward to in their future. So if you're not being defined by a vision of the future, it just means to me that you're more in love with your past than you are with the future. So how do you teach people to believe in a future that they can't see or experience with their senses yet, but they've thought about enough times in their mind that their brain is literally changed to look like the event has already occurred? The latest research in neuroscience says that's absolutely possible. We know that. And how do you teach a person to select a new possibility in their future and begin to emotionally embrace that future before it's made manifest to such a degree that their body, as their unconscious mind, is believing it's living in that future reality in the present moment, and they're signaling new genes and new ways ahead of the environment. Now, till their body begins to change to look like the event has already occurred. We've proven that that's possible. Now think about this.
So the more you think about your desired future, the joy, the gratitude, the feelings you want to have that are more positive, the more you think about it as a future thing happening, the more your body shifts now.
Exactly. So your body is believing it's living in that future reality in the present moment. Now think about this. The stronger the emotion you feel from some condition in your life, the more altered you feel inside of you, the more you narrow your focus on the cause, and the brain freezes an image and takes a snapshot. And that memory now is embossed in the brain. It's branded in there. So then people think neurologically within the circuits of those past experiences, and they feel chemically within the boundaries of those emotions. And the stronger the betrayal, the stronger the trauma, the more the body's living in the past, right? Crazy. So how do you reverse that? So now, if you truly got passionate about a future, we've all done this. You get a wild idea in your mind and you start holding on to that vision and you're preoccupied with it. All of a sudden, the thought in your mind becomes the experience, and you start feeling the energy of the future. Yeah. Now, the stronger the emotion you feel from that vision, the more you're going to pay attention to the picture in your mind, and now you're remembering your future.
And vice versa, the stronger you pay attention to the feeling of the past, pain, you're going to create the pain in this moment.
Exactly. So it requires a coherent brain, and we now know that there's a formula for that, and we've got beautiful research to show that people can do it. They just have to practice. And it requires a coherent heart, because resentment, frustration, impatience creates a very incoherent heart.
Yeah.
And when that heart becomes incoherent, you stop trusting yourself. There's no energy there. You stop trusting in your future. Wow. So then, if there's physical evidence in your brain and body, physical evidence to look like the event has already occurred, it's quite possible you'll be thinking neurologically within the circuits of your future, and you'll begin to feel chemically within the boundaries of that emotion of your future. And how you think and how you feel is your state of being. And now your state of being is living in the future instead of the past. Now, the moment you disconnect from the emotion of your future because of traffic or some coworker or your ex or whatever people come up with, now you're back to the energy of your past. And now you're going to start looking for it, analyzing, why hasn't it happened? Well, if you're feeling the emotion of your future, why would you look for it? Because you would feel like it already happened, and that is the place where the magic happens. So then you can't just do this, get up, and then return back to your old state of being. You got to maintain that modified state of mind and body.
When life happens?
Well, let me finish.
If I punch you in the face right now, how do you maintain?
Well, of course. I mean, we all take blows in our lives, and we all react emotionally. But the question is, how long are you going to react?
Right.
So then, if you can't mediate and regulate your emotional reactions, and those emotions linger for days, that's a
years
mood.
For some people.
Mood, and then months, temperament, years, personality trait. So then the person's personality is literally based on the past. But they don't know that because they're doing it over and over again. It becomes a subconscious program. So now, if it requires a coherent brain and a coherent heart, then we have to train people how to self-regulate. So we've done thousands and thousands of measurements. We've partnered with the Heart Math Institute to teach people how to create and sustain heart coherence.
How do we do it?
Well,
besides going to your workshop, what's the simplified version? I'm sure it takes more time than...
Well, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. It just requires getting still, closing your eyes, putting your attention on your heart, changing your breath so that you move into the present moment. And when you slow your breathing down, you slow your brain waves down. When you slow your brain waves down, now you're accessing your autonomic nervous system. So then you train a person how to open their heart and feel an elevated emotion. And it takes a little practice. And just like a flower that takes time to bloom, it takes a little bit of time. But if you work in trading the resentment, the frustration, or the impatience for gratitude, appreciation, and thankfulness, and you keep at it, there'll come a moment where that system switches on, and now you're feeling grateful for no reason at all. Right. That's not a bad thing, because gratitude, the emotional signature of gratitude, means something's happening to you, something has happened to you, you're receiving something, or you just received something. So your body then, when you're feeling gratitude, is in the perfect state of receiving. So then that means then you'll accept, believe, and surrender to the thoughts equal to the emotional state of gratitude. If you're living in resentment, you're living in fear, you're living in impatience, you could say, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, I'm wealthy, I'm with all you want, and that thought's going to stop right at the brainstem and never make its way to the body, because the body is
not feeling it, or because why?
Because you're feeling resentment, and that thought is not consistent with the emotion of resentment. Resentment has a different set of thoughts, right? In other words, once you start opening your heart, it begins to move into coherence. It begins to produce a measurable magnetic field up to 3 meters wide. Now that's frequency, that's energy. And all that energy, that frequency, carries information, carries an intent. So then when you're feeling gratitude and your heart is open, you're broadcasting energy into the field. Now,
frequency.
A frequency. You lay the intent of the thought of your health or your wealth. That frequency can carry the thought of your wealth. It can carry the thought of your health. If you're suffering, suffering does not carry, that energy does not carry the thought of your wealth. It carries a different set of thoughts. So then we're teaching people how to self-regulate, because if you're going to believe in that future that you're imagining with all of your heart, it better be open and activated.
Right.
And you better know how to self-regulate. And you have to know the moment you disconnect from the energy of your future because of some circumstance in your life and you lose that feeling, if you're practicing it on a daily basis with your eyes closed, then the next level is to be able to open your eyes and do it right in the moment and be able to self-regulate and change the frustration from some experience in your life back to the energy of your future. Now, that requires great awareness and great effort. But if you have a community of people that are practicing this on a daily basis, and they're connected to their future, because that's where their mind is, they begin to want the future more than the emotions of the past. So we've done enough measurements now, Louis, to know that we can teach people how to do that, and we have evidence that people can sustain it for 45 minutes to an hour. It's a skill now. They know that they know how to do it. So now they have brain coherence and heart coherence. Well, once the heart begins to become orderly and coherent, it acts as an amplifier and it drives energy to the brain. So now the brain is getting more energy once the heart is open, and then you're thinking a different set of thoughts. And those thoughts produce different chemicals for you to feel more of that. And here comes nitric oxide from oxytocin, and then all of a sudden your heart literally starts to swell. It literally begins to open up, and there's more energy going there, and now you're coming from a different level of mind.
Growing up in this religion that I grew up, it was a constant reminder, a daily practice to think in a certain way, to think that you can never be physically harmed, that you're infinite love, that you're infinite light, your infinite soul, spirit, life, truth, and love, right? It was a constantly taught to me that I'm never able to get physically harmed. And that if you are, that means your thought is off, and you just have to recorrect your thought and you'll have a healing, right? It's a little extreme for some because, and if you're not, well practiced in it, and if you don't know how to really manage the thoughts and train, then you can hurt yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
You can really hurt your body, and that's, it happened. Right?
Yeah.
It happened for times. But I use this, philosophy, strategy, technique, idea in sports. And I would rehearse constantly, like you talked about, I was constantly rehearsing the games, what I wanted to create for the season, for my body, for my life. And it just seems like it would always happen. I would rehearse constantly over and over and get lost in my thoughts. You call it the quantum field, is that what you call it? So I was in the quantum field to be on the physical field. I was playing in the quantum field just like I'd be playing on the physical field.
Exactly.
And I remember I would watch game film of world record holders in track and field and football and watch them every single night and mentally rehearse the same movements they would have before I would fall asleep. And then I would practice the next day. But I was constantly rehearsing in my mind how I wanted to show up. I was rehearsing this moment. In my life, 10 years ago, I was rehearsing what I'd be doing this year in my life. Do you do this on a daily practice for yourself? And if so, how does that rehearsal look like?
I do. So two things I wanted to say about that. I mean, first of all, this is really not for everybody. I mean, because it's like pregnancy. Either you are or you're not. I mean, there's no in between.
A little pregnant?
You can't be kind of a little pregnant. Either you are or you're not. And so you can't.
Who is it for and who's it not for?
Yeah. What I found is that when I started studying spontaneous remissions, it was for people who had reached the end of their emotional belief where there was no longer any answers. The doctors gave up on it, had nothing else to do, right? And so they changed everything about themselves. And some of them were physicians, It's just going like, wow, well, what have I been doing? But now fast forward to today. I mean, in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. I mean, you got so much information. You don't need a doctor. You don't need a teacher. You don't need a priest or a minister to gain information. You don't need an authority, right? Technology gives us the very quick information. So now people are informed. 20 years ago, a doctor said, do you have this health condition?
You believed it.
Yeah, and not only that, you signed on the dotted line and you got the treatment or the surgery. Fast forward to today, everybody just kind of goes, wait a second.
There's multiple opinions,
yeah,
let me get this.
You go home and you research it and you say, I want to try this. So now all of a sudden people are taking their power back. So people are more informed. So surgical procedures, pharmaceuticals are not always the first choice for people because there's other ways. And people only do the best with what's available. So now information has scaled and changed the way people face off with health conditions. And now people are coming into this, number one, if they have a health condition that they can self-correct. And number two, there are people that are saying, if I'm headed for a genetic destiny, because my mother had this health condition, my father had this, and I know the gene doesn't create it, but how I act and how I feel is going to signal the same gene. Well, I'm going to just change my genetic future. So now people are super proactive in the process, right? So that's point number one. But point number two is that if you start realizing that this is actually possible, and I can tell you that without a doubt it is, because we were talking before we started, the things that I'm witnessing. I mean, if in the beginning it was just like a person got a little better, you felt a little this, a little that, you know, their food allergies went away, and, but then all of a sudden we're talking about, in our last event, 2 people with stage 4 cancer, completely reversed. Wow. A woman with a very serious neurological disorder, they couldn't even name it. Crutches, the whole bit, left the event, no crutches. Well, how did she do that? Well, let me ask you a question. If she doesn't look like a movie star and she's not buffed and young and attractive and successful, she's just like a normal person, and you listen to this person's story, and there's 1,000 people listening to that story, you're going to scratch your head and say, wow, if she can do it, so can I. And just like, you know, an infection spreads amongst a community that creates disease, health and wellness can be as infectious as disease. Right. So do I use it? Yes, but not in the way that people think. Like, I'm not interested in success. I've had it. I know that that's an important element. I think success is a side effect of who you are. But what am I after? I'm after making a difference in the world. I want people to become empowered. So my rehearsals, my meditations, in